Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you all for coming. Welcome to this NSI career panel. We appreciate you taking time today to come. It's our privilege to introduce you to some of our fellows, some of the folks that we've had the privilege of working with over the years, and give you an opportunity to pick their brains about this career field and about how to get into it, and how enjoyable it is, and how challenging it is, and how rewarding it is. So I appreciate you coming today. My name is Darren Dick. I'm the Director of Programs for the National Security Institute. Some of you I've had in class, some of you I anticipate I'll have in class in the future. The Institute was founded a little over 2 years ago, not only to help administer the national security curriculum here at the law school, but also to serve as a think tank that focuses on identifying and advocating practical solutions to real hard national security problems. And so we've been engaged in that activity very successfully over the last 2 years, and encourage you to come by our offices on the 3rd floor if you have any additional questions or any interest in what we're doing at the Institute. I don't want to take too much time today talking about the Institute. I want to introduce our moderator today. Our moderator is Paula Doyle. I've had the privilege of working with Paula professionally when I was staff director and deputy staff director of the House Intelligence Committee. And while I've had the privilege of working with Paula, I don't have her bio committed to memory, so forgive me while I read her bio to make sure I don't leave out any of the good stuff. Paula is a national security and foreign policy expert with over 30 years of experience within the diplomatic and intelligence community. Currently, she teaches a class on Turkey and the Levant at Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service, Center for Security Studies. Previously, she served as the Associate Deputy Director for Operations Technology within the Central Intelligence Agency. Before that, she served as the Deputy National Counterintelligence Executive within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, where she led efforts with the White House to shape and implement insider threat detection programs. Prior to that, she served within the CIA in Asia and the Levant and worked on counterproliferation issues. Ms. Doyle holds a BA in International Affairs and a BS in International Business from the University of Colorado at Boulder. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Doyle.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just give a few opening remarks to set the stage, and then I'll introduce our panel. So first of all, thank you to the NSI for allowing us all to participate this afternoon on the importance of recruiting talent and energetic people to work in the national security field. I join our panel members in encouraging all of you to thoughtfully consider working in the intelligence community, foreign service, law enforcement, and the U.S. military. The IC is in constant search of talent. Each agency needs expertise in world powers and alliances, and we can get into that. Why would we need both? The law, cyber, counterterrorism, counterproliferation, data science, and STEM. Employees and contractors with these areas of expertise will form the backbone of America's economic security and national security for many years to come. We live in a hyper-connected world that values speed and veracity. You will find state-of-the-art technologies that operate from each domain: space, air, land, and sea. And there's a reason I did not mention cyber. We can talk about that too. You will find satellites, drones, every imaginable communications technique to support warfighters, paramilitary operations, and people who must operate under deep cover. You will find state-of-the-art offensive and defensive cyber technologies, powerful data analytics, highly motivated workforces who use these capabilities using the rule of law, covert action findings, and a strong code of ethics. After nearly a decade in the Foreign Service, where I used a typewriter, lots of whiteout, and huge maps to navigate cities and countries around the world, I joined the CIA as a case officer, also known as a core collector today. The leaps in technology between the State Department and the agency were vast, not only as I made that career transition, but as the technology explosion burst onto the global scene after 9/11. Because I worked in human operations, I will focus for just a few minutes on the vital role technologies play in helping us manage and protect our stable of agents, and especially those men and women who help put their lives on the line and in order to keep Washington informed. First, we use technologies to spot individuals who have access to information we need. We use open sources, classified information, and data analytic techniques to help us narrow the funnel of opportunities and focus on foreign sources who are in positions to know and who are in positions to learn information we need. Once we identify targets, core collectors work on ways to meet, assess, and vet these people in person or virtually. We befriend targets, and we ask them wide varieties of questions. We then work behind the scenes with experts to verify their identities and their answers. Do they really have access to the people, information, and facilities they claim? What motivates them to share such data? Technologies help us perform these tasks every day, every hour, and every minute by comparing what we hear from targets with what we know and what we suspect to be true. And in this particular case, validation never ends. When the stars line up and a target demonstrates access and is motivated to work clandestinely with us, we recruit him or her. We use a wide variety of technologies to help us handle each agent securely. While I cannot talk about these technologies and techniques here, you can just trust me. Huminters from the CIA and across the IC leverage a whole wide range of technologies to keep information flowing securely and to protect those clandestine sources. Nothing about marrying these technologies with clandestine agents is straightforward. Humans make mistakes. Technologies are imperfect. These jobs take a great deal of attention to detail, deep expertise, and they take a lot of grit. Clandestine sources do depend on a whole wide variety of people across the U.S. intelligence community to keep their backs and keep them safe. We leverage cyber technologies and global technologies to spot, assess, develop, recruit, validate, and handle our clandestine sources completely virtually. For those of you who grew up using opposable thumbs to text and stay in touch with friends and complete strangers via social media, you will understand this without any of my help. The IC, however, is not just interested in making contact with people. That's the easy part. The IC must assess the veracity of the person. Is he who he says he is? Or is he a fake account? Is he a bot? Is he a bad actor? Is he a foreign government? Or is he an avatar? We have to assess the veracity also of this person's information. Is it true? Is it propaganda? Is it completely fake? These are not trivial tasks for the general American public in terms of assessing views on television and social media platforms, and they are not trivial for the IC either. They take strong analytic skills and a never-ending curiosity to dig why. Why is someone sharing such information with you? When the IC disseminates information from wide ranges of sources, it tends to be fragmentary. It is up to the analysts to discern which fragments to believe, which pieces fit where, which streams of information to discount, and which data to consider as new information comes in. Analysts, in my view, have the hardest jobs in the intelligence community. Their work goes to policymakers. They are under incredible pressures, therefore, to be right in their judgments. I've not spent any time talking about the massive S&T collection missions across the intelligence community, but let me assure you that they are world-class. Huminters interact with several S&T collection missions, be they managed by the CIA, NSA, NGA, DIA, or other parts of DoD, the Department of Energy, and our select foreign partners. My own career took me to every continent, taught me several languages, and gave me opportunities to meet world leaders, monarchs, and espionage masters. I love espionage. I wrote hundreds of time-sensitive intelligence reports that informed and influenced policymakers and warfighters alike. I met the love of my life, and together we raised 5 wonderful children. I made the best friends a woman could ever dream to have while working in the intelligence community and the Foreign Service. It was the honor of my professional life to be named the Associate Deputy Director of CIA for Operations Technology between 2014 and 2016. It provided opportunities to champion the needs of our clandestine agents and foreign liaison partners and our incredible cadre of chiefs of station and corps collectors. My wish for all of you in the audience is that you too will find purpose and meaning in your careers, that you too will make a real difference in this world, and that you too will feel an intense sense of belonging to a nation that is so much bigger than your own self-interest. The panel here assembled and I will place great faith in you. We are here to help you get started, to mentor you along as you struggle, to celebrate your victories, and to keep you motivated. Don't miss the chance to serve our country. Thank you so much. So now to the fun part and the real reason that you're here. First, I'd like to introduce Jason. You want to wave your hand so everybody knows which one you want? Sorry. Jason's not here.
He is not.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Skip. Matthew. Matthew is an NSI Fellow and Chairman of the Cyber and Privacy Working Group at the Regulatory Transparency Project. He is a member of the International and National Security Law Executive Committee practice group called the Federalist Society. Previously, Matthew was the Vice President, Corporate Secretary, and Associate General Counsel at Johnson Controls. Prior to its merger with Johnson Controls, Matthew held a number of positions with Tyco International, including Vice President, Chief Compliance, and Audit Officer. Before Tyco, he was a lawyer at the National Security Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He has a bachelor's degree and a JD from Indiana University.
Go Hoosiers.
Go Hoosiers, even though you didn't kind of make it through the ladder this year.
Wow. Go Hoosiers 2020.
I love it. Jeff Kahn, raise your hand, Jeff. Jeff is an NSI Visiting Fellow and Senior Manager of Government Relations covering cyber and tech issues for Accenture. Jeff has an extensive background in intelligence and national security issues. Most recently, he served on the Presidential Transitional Team, assisting then Representative Mike Pompeo in his nomination and confirmation as Director of CIA. He also joined Director Pompeo as a senior advisor to CIA's Chief Operating Officer. Prior to that, Jeff served as a policy director and CIA program manager for the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, otherwise known as the HPSI. Jeff received his bachelor's degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and his master's degree from George Washington University.
Carolina's
Yeah, we'll go for the Tar Heels until we get to our next panel member who might have something to say about that. David Priest. Give a shout out for David. David is the NSI Visiting Direct Fellow and a writer and speaker on national security, intelligence, and the presidency. Currently serving as the Chief Operating Officer at Warfare Institute.
Lawfare.
Not warfare. Yeah, we're going for the law here. We're at the Antonin Scalia School of Law. Lawfare Institute, a popular blog dedicated to national security issues. He served at the CIA during the Bill Clinton and George W. Bush administrations as an intelligence officer, manager, and daily intelligence briefer, as well as at State Department as a desk officer in the Near East Bureau. David obtained his Bachelor's of Science from Illinois Wesleyan University and his MA and PhD in political science from Duke. So the game is on. He taught political science classes at Duke University, George Washington University, and right here at George Mason. So without further ado, please come forward with your questions and we'll be happy to take them.
If you don't have any questions, we ask questions of you.
So I know for a lot of us here, first years for the most part, there's some more senior class members. We are at the point where we get that administrative law is a great class that will help us in any national security application that we choose to go in the future. But do you have any other recommendations, things that we might not have heard from other people?
Nope.
Oh, sorry.
Well, since I'm a lawyer, I'll take this, and I have a law degree. You will get all kinds of terrific advice about what classes you should take for what purpose. I'm going to give you my own view. This may not be the Mason view, may not be the NSI view. Take the classes that interest you. Even if you aspire to go to national security, if you want to take that family law class, take it. Take classes that interest you. Take classes with really smart professors. Take classes that will prepare you and equip you to pass the bar on first go. So what I did in law school is I took the widest variety of stuff I could take. Because the reality, I'll speak to my own experience, nobody ever looked at my transcript and said, oh, I see you took 4 classes in national security, I'm gonna hire you. Or you didn't take 6, so you don't get the job. So my view is take the classes that interest you, work with the best, smartest professors who are gonna guide and mentor you, and don't get overly hung up about what it is. Administrative law is a great class to take if you wanna go into government, whether it's national security or any other area. It's very handy if you wanna be in private practice. But use your summers as a way to really focus on what you're truly interested in, whether it's getting an internship with a federal agency, or a law firm that does that kind of work, or a public advocacy group. But I wouldn't get overly hung up about your curriculum at this stage or at any stage while you're in law school. Get your law degree, pass your bar, and then you can start thinking about, what do you want to do career-wise? I don't know if David or...
Quickly, more seasoned students, is there a class on intelligence and law?
Yes.
Yeah, take that. There you go. It's fascinating, and it will open up a world you might discover you don't want to do that, and you never want to touch it again. Most people take it and say, oh, I'd like to be a part of that sometime. I mean, from my perspective, the intelligence business, yeah, you get all the benefits of long hours, relatively long pay, the kind of desktop technology that Paula mentioned about typewriters. We're better than that now, but still no cell phones, no social media at the workplace. So with all of those benefits, you have to have something, but it's made up for by a real sense of mission and accomplishment. Paula mentioned meeting foreign heads of state, briefing presidents, actually having that impact, which is perhaps beyond what some of my colleagues and friends feel working for some of the best law firms, major banks, Fortune 500 companies, in terms of the mission and the service element of it.
I would just say at CIA, we are interested also in constitutional law. You cannot work covert action without understanding the U.S. Constitution. So really, really important, vital knowledge is big, required for working covert action.
What
Can you
advice?
say your name, just so that we can connect with you?
My name's Alex, I'm a first year. What advice would you give kind of like new people coming into the field? Because I know some of the positions that you're in and some of the great things that you've done, you don't just step out of law school and step right into that. So like, what advice would you give people coming right out of school and into the industry about getting to these better positions?
Sure, I'm happy to start. This is a big question I get all the time. Going back to NASCAR, definitely pursue your passion. There are a whole range of jobs available for folks like you. You can do law and national security very easily. There's clearly jobs there. You could be a case officer, you could be an analyst, you could be a support officer. You can even, with your background, be an S&T officer. There are lots of people that have liberal arts backgrounds and law backgrounds that do the S&T stuff. I would also say, CIA is definitely the cream of the crop. They're the best, and that's great. But if you have this passion for national security, a passion for intelligence, they're not the only game in town. And it's hard to get in. It's hard to get in. It takes a long time. They're very selective. But DIA, if you want to stay in DC, DIA is right here. Naval Intelligence is right here. FBI is right here. There are lots of options. My career, I started in Navy Intelligence, which is in Suitland, Maryland, not exactly the nicest neighborhood, but I landed in a job that totally set my career on the track that got me where I am today. So my suggestion is be really broad. Don't necessarily worry about, if I land, that first job, that first thing that came my way, maybe that's not the right fit, maybe that's not what I want to do. Most of the people in the IC and most people in the agency, they do a job for 2 or 3 years and then move on to the next job. As people rotate throughout their careers, they cross the people who rise to the top cross directorates, they cross missions, so it's really a really broad career. If you want to get out, I would start if you think about your career as a pyramid, start really broad. Every time you make a decision, you're going to narrow your options in the future, so don't limit yourself early on.
Let me build on that by saying that most law students considering going into the national security community think about working in the Office of General Counsel at CIA or something like that, because that's where lawyers go. Don't limit yourself to that, because I worked with some of the best analysts I worked with, people who were analyzing the intentions and capabilities of foreign governments and transnational groups, were trained as attorneys, and it actually helped them in terms of how they performed the job. Some of the best case officers I worked with, and I know others will back me up on this, were actually people with law degrees. And that can be useful in some covert areas as well. Don't limit yourself to thinking, if I just want to do national security work, if I want to do law of the sea, fine. You're probably going to get a job at the State Department. I get that. But you could do a whole lot of things in a whole lot of areas that build on your legal education and your law degree, but don't necessarily have you in the general counsel's office.
Yeah, and so the first kind of national security job I had, and it's not, you know, and what the sum of the story is, be open to indirect paths to get to where you quote want to go, because where you think you want to go as you sit here today may not be the career you build out for yourself. So it was over 20 years ago, I was sitting in your seat, and I thought I knew exactly where my career was going to go and what I was going to do in my career. It was mapped out, because I was the type A nerdy person that had mapped it out since he was 12 years old. My career bears no resemblance to what that plan was at all. And so what I'm saying to you is, be open to taking chances. Be open to the job that doesn't seem to squarely fit in what you think your path is, because it may open 10 new doors and may expose you to people and opportunities that you never dreamed of. I mean, I was in private practice over in McLean, and I was doing trial work at a big law firm. And the next thing you know, I'm in Baghdad, Iraq, advising the Iraqis on all kinds of justice issues and all kinds of other things that I had, candidly, no business advising anyone on, but I took a chance. And I went down to an interview at the Pentagon solely with the thought of, you know, I've never been inside the Pentagon. It'd be cool to see that building. And within 20 minutes, the guy that was interviewing me said, when can you deploy? Are you available next week? And I was like, whoa, no. But I can be available in 3 weeks. And that's how my national security path began. And so what I'm saying is, just be open and flexible to the curveball that may come your way in your career path, because that might be the thing that you want to follow.
Amen. Other questions? Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Justin. I'm also a first year. My question's for those of you who work with the Foreign Service. Understanding that can be a long, competitive process to get a job there. Is that something you'd recommend doing early on in your career?
I do. I don't know about you. I was young, living in Texas. I had aspired to working in the Foreign Service from the time I was 17 years old. And I look back on it now and I go, wow, I thought it was a beeline. I'm kind of glad I didn't know that it wasn't a beeline. The Foreign Service exam, I took the Foreign Service exam in 1983. So a little bit dated here. It was only given once a year. It was only the first week of December, always during finals. So it was a very stressful time for those of us in university taking that test, but it was a good first, it gave State Department the first real good sense of who knew what where and put you in piles. And so you need to know when you apply for these jobs, you end up in a yes pile, a maybe pile, and a no pile. And the no pile is pretty big. Next comes that oral interview, and they now call it the oral assessment, but it used to be an oral interview. And in my case, it had an inbox, outbox exercise. You set up at the desk with a phone. Back in the old days, we had phones on our desks. And it was a matter of getting to know you. How did you prioritize? How did you act under stress? How did you how did you rationalize your decisions? There's no right answer or wrong answer, by the way, in that exercise. It's getting to know you and how you rationalize decision making. I came to view in my career I did a lot of management reviews as I grew more senior, and what you're really doing in management reviews is, things have gone wrong. You don't do management reviews when things go wrong. In the case of things going wrong, my value added in the management review was not to judge the decision you made. It was either yes or no, go or no go. My job was to understand the rationale you used to get there. And that's where the learning and judgment process came into play. That's where we could do lessons learned back to the workforce. It wasn't in the yes, no, although everybody wants to talk about that. It's really in judgment. So the exercises give the State Department as well as the agency, when you go through your oral interviews, an opportunity to see how your rationalization process works.
Justin, let me ask you for something else. What interests you about the Foreign Service?
A few things. I think just the ability to travel, work with foreign governments and maybe high up officials of foreign governments, and also a little bit of prestige to it as well.
Okay. Yeah, all of those things are true elsewhere also. The Foreign Service has its own culture, which I think all those are valid for the Foreign Service. My experience, I was not in the Foreign Service. I was doing a Foreign Service job, but I was not in the Foreign Service. But working with many very good Foreign Service officers over the years, it's like any other group of people larger than something that's a representative sample size. Is you've got some really good officers and some not so good officers, but the average is really high. And you don't have the process does weed out the people who can't think straight, who can't speak adequately to somebody in a stressful diplomatic situation.
For the most part.
Yes. There are outliers in any organization, maybe even in this room. But the Foreign Service, it tends to be at a higher level than your average group of any other organization that I would work with outside of CIA and other organizations like that. What does that say to you? Well, it says the competition is hard. And if you plan on working, even interning, has anyone tried to intern at the State Department? It is a very long process. Yeah, and very hard to get in. And they may tell you, well, we'll let you know in a few weeks. And then a few months later, when you're about to pull the trigger, you still don't know whether you can say yes or no to another opportunity. We're dealing with this with a potential intern at Lawfare right now, who's still waiting on the State Department to let her know. So definitely, if you're interested in those things, you apply. You go through the process. It won't hurt you to do so other than losing some time and stress applying. But if you're here, you've already got time and stress not. You can cover that. Don't put all your eggs in that basket. Not only because it's difficult to get into, but I know people who have gone through the Foreign Service process and the exam and have said, yeah, this isn't what I had in mind. This isn't the kind of, I'm gonna be stamping visas for 2 or 4 years first before I get to do that fun stuff, if I ever do. That's not for me. I want to do something right away that puts me in the game. Keep your options open.
And expect to take the test more than once. It's really common. Most of you have probably never failed at anything. And so this is as we talk about resilience and grit, you don't get that from constant success. You get it from trying things and not succeeding, and doing a moment of self-reflection, saying, what did I learn from this? What did I learn about me? My advice to all of you is know your true self. Don't grab at something because your peer group thinks it's a cool thing to do. Or your mom and dad put you under pressure, or your sister did it before you did. Do it because you want to do it. This is hard work. We all have the same 24 hours a day. We get no more, no less. So do something that really jazzes you up.
Is your sister a Foreign Service officer? Okay, then you're fine.
Yes, sir.
My name is Andrew, also a first year with these lovely people here.
Not all.
He's pretty lovely. So Tino had a good question about what courses we should take. My question sort of builds on that as far as what extracurriculars do you think we should pursue, other than things we like to, de-stress and so on. Is there anything in particular that would make us stand out for the IC as a whole?
I mean, I don't know that we'll tell you much new here. Language, incredibly valuable. These days, exposure to technology, but I'm not talking about social media, but exposure to data science or some degree of coding is helpful. It's not going to be, that's not for everybody, but at least a basic understanding to be able to converse in that language, because so much of what the intelligence and national security business is, at least on the intelligence and data side, it's about data. So some exposure, or at least understanding of what's going on in that space. And frankly, overseas experience is also really valuable. I would suggest you spend 2 years in China, but outside of that, just being culturally aware and familiar with people who have lived in just the United States and had exposure to just Americans sometimes don't have the same perspective as someone who's traveled a little bit more.
Yeah, and I recognize you're all law students, so you're all fairly busy as it is. But I would, to add on to what was just said, do things to demonstrate your interest in the field. So that might mean being a research assistant to the prof at this school that really focuses on national security topics, or at the Shar School. If you've got the chops to do it, write a short article and see if you can get it published on a topic of interest to you. Do things that educate yourself and also are ways to demonstrate your interest to potential employers down the road, that I'm not just the guy that came out of George Mason with a law degree. I also did these national security things. I joined this organization. I attended these events. I did this, I did that. I mean, that's a way to separate yourself from a lot of your law school graduate peers who also might have an interest in it. But if you can say, I've done these things in addition to my classwork, if I was a hiring manager, I'd say, I want to talk to this person first because he or she's demonstrated this interest and done these things before the other person that just wants to work here and just has a degree.
In terms of extracurriculars, one thing to avoid, maybe this is most useful, is don't do anything illegal. Okay, I mean, knock that out first. I know you're crossing things off your list now. Yeah.
Is that a real problem?
No, that could be a problem. I like the idea of, research assistants and trying to write things. I mean, Lawfare, we publish from law students, and some cutting edge stuff that has gotten a lot of play. So if you have an interest, I don't know what your intellectual interests are, but if it's American history, well, then find that case that's relevant to what's going on today that nobody else has talked about. Like, there was one recently, he was not a law school student, but not that long out of law school, wrote an article for us about this unknown amendment from the 1930s that sought to make it a public referendum whenever the United States wanted to go to war. Wow, that kind of changes things a little bit. But that was going to be an amendment to the Constitution. Nobody had really researched this yet. He quickly did it, researched it, wrote an article about it. If your interest is international, then find that country you're interested in and say, what's something that's been underexplored, especially as it relates to the law or institutions? Pop out an article on it. That kind of thing gets attention no matter where you are applying for a job, because that is not the norm. Not all of you are going to have an article published somewhere before you leave here. So if you have an interest, research it, put it down into words. That's a good one.
Yeah, I love it. Just one other thing that flashed through my mind that happened in my own career. When I was in law school, our law school had a study abroad program, and I did that. And during that study abroad period, I wound up working for a member of parliament. I was in London. And that was something, I wasn't doing glamorous work, but I was essentially, what an intern does for a senator or congressman. But that was something I was able to put on my resume that stood out. It was slightly different than most other people. Oh, he worked for a member of parliament. Oh, he's got an interest in international affairs. Oh, maybe this is a reason that we send this dope to Baghdad, because at least he's lived abroad and he's got an interest in these things. So in other words, start thinking about what can I do to put on my CV that gives me hooks, or gives that hiring manager a hook to say, he or she has an interest in these things and has demonstrated it.
And network. You have the ability here, yes, through events like this, but there are a lot of events through the National Security Institute, through the Hayden Center for Intelligence connected to the Public Policy School. There are events at Brookings, at CSIS downtown, all the time. Tomorrow night at Lawfare, at Brookings Institution, instead of having a panel, we're having 3 women panelists talking about the Barr letter, the Mueller report, and what this means going forward. At events like that, you have the chance to interact with people, to talk to people, perhaps like us, but much more interesting and much more diverse, and say, hi, how did you get into what you're doing? Because I find it interesting. Here's what I'm interested in. How could I explore that? I mean, Paula and I, we just realized we had a connection from 15 years ago. Matt and I just avoided a connection at the Justice Department by a few months. It's a relatively small community. And once you have those interactions, once you have those connections, that's useful for you in getting perhaps recommendation letters. That's useful for you in terms of getting an introduction to a job. That's useful for you when you get that first job and find out that it sucks and you'd rather do something else, to cast out to your network and say, what else is available? So some of your extracurricular time should be just going to events and interacting with people who are doing the kinds of things that look interesting to you.
Echoing both their points, and I won't spend much time, but I also interned on the Hill for who was then the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. Super valuable. Now, once you got the job, no one cares about that anymore, but it does, someone will glance at it and it does recognize a resume. The other part with networking is, you can go and apply to a lot of these jobs online, but sometimes having someone on the inside who happens to know you, an internal referral, will give you a little bump, at least to get that first introduction. So it actually is tangibly valuable in the application process.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on the theme of networking before we move to the next question. I'm an introvert. So me sitting on this panel right now, looking at this crowd view, is slightly uncomfortable for me. I'm not the guy that walks into the room and knows everyone in 30 minutes and works my way around the room. Networking doesn't mean you have to go to a cocktail party and exchange pleasantries with everyone in the room. So if you are more on the introverted side, there's still effective ways to network, and it's one-on-one. So if you get that job with the professor, or you just go to that professor's office hours because he or she is doing something in national security, and you start to talk to them about your interests and say to them, are there people you think I should talk to? They'll probably give you a handful of people, and then you just work your way out from there, and it doesn't have to be this big social event where you're uncomfortable. And given stats, about half of the people in this room are introverts, and so I just want to give people a sense of hope that if you're not the life of the party, it doesn't mean that your ability to network is cut off. You just got to think about it strategically in a way that's comfortable to you, but also a way that gives you those entry points into this kind of national security world.
Matthew, I'm so glad you said that, because I take office hours at Georgetown. I've got dedicated office hours for my students I teach, but I also do office hours 2 extra days a week, because I found that it was just a convenient way for me to be available to people. The most important question you can ask of someone you're not taking a class from is, how can you help me meet the right people? How can you help me read the right stuff if you're on the fence about something? Because what you find from someone that you're not studying under is objectivity, right? There's nothing in it for me, I don't know any of you, so I'll just give you my candid advice and want to point you in a profitable right direction so that you don't waste valuable time or go fishing in a bad pond. And those of us who've got the experience, we can help you avoid some of those liar, pants on fires, because there's a lot of them out there. So, I believe you had a question. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, my name's Christina. I'm also a 1L. I had a question, if you guys could talk more about your transition from either education or one career path to national security in particular. I know Matthew had spoke a little bit about it, but for the other two of you.
Happy to start. So I think, unlike Matt, I actually had a plan, and it kept really close to what the plan was. My undergrad was in something called Peace, War, and Defense. I graduated right after 9/11, so I entered the program when 9/11, before 9/11 had happened. And I knew I wanted to do national security policy, right? This is my passion. I did love doing games like that in high school, and I loved my college experience. And when I graduated undergrad, I applied to all the intel agencies, so especially the ones in DC. I think NSA, DIA, ONI, CIA, maybe 1 or 2 others. Did some interviews, and I ended up getting a job at Navy Intelligence. I did a job at a nonprofit in DC while I was waiting for my clearance. actually really interesting, fascinating job. And I landed in, for me, what was the perfect spot. So I wasn't an analyst and I wasn't a collector. I was one of the guys who I was working with a group of about 100 China Navy analysts at Navy Intel. And my job was to go find out what their questions were, then go to the Intel community to get better collection on their requests. I did that job for a year and a half, then like, oh, it was 2005, Iran started to become the thing, oh, let's duplicate, we just did it on China, let's do it on Iran. Did that on Iran, got really good at it. I'm like, well, that's great, but I don't really have an interest in Navy stuff. This has been fun, but I want to do national stuff. So I found the office at CIA that does the same thing. Maybe, got someone to introduce me. I went over to the agency and did a very similar thing. Actually, the agency's office that did that activity, much more bureaucratic, didn't get as much done. If you ask me my success stories, most of my success stories are in Navy intelligence. Big bureaucracy, got it, did an overseas tour. I'm like, all right, I got this. Let me go transition back to the policy world. I worked in CIA's policy office, and I very quickly realized, well, I can't go to the NSC because the NSC doesn't do intelligence community policy. And I've learned, my expertise was in how the intelligence community works. Well, who does his intelligence community policy? The HIPSI and CISI. I ended up getting a job down in HIPSI, which then ended up being kind of the dream job for me. So, but that's the long story short is, like, I had a North Star, which I was aiming towards. The North Star I got to was frankly better than what I had ever dreamed of. But it started by me going the non-traditional route. I went to do a Navy Intel job, and I didn't frankly know what I was applying for when I got it. So that's my story.
Sure. For me, it wasn't, there's a parallel to law school, but I went and got my PhD in political science at Duke. Much better institution than the high school down the street called Chapel Hill.
I knew it would come
I know,
out.
UNC is a great high school. It's a great high school.
This is why so many people find Duke fans so detestable.
One of many reasons. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it was just happenstance that I met someone who happened to be working at CIA, and I was looking for a job, and he said, let me see your resume. I gave it to him, and the next day CIA called and interviewed me. So I wasn't planning it, but I'm glad I went because it opened up a whole lot of things, led to some great jobs, most of which I can talk about. So if you have more questions later, let's talk. But up to and including delivering the president's daily brief, the daily document that goes for the last 50 plus years to the president and the people whom the president designates to also receive it, which has been as small as 2 people and as many as 40 or 50. Back in my day, the readership included the Attorney General of the United States and the FBI Director. So for more than a year, I got to brief the AG and the FBI Director, a guy named Bob Mueller that no one's heard of since. I wonder what happened to him. So experiences like that were never in my plan. So I didn't transition with a thought of, wow, I'm gonna be downtown after 9/11, a while ago, briefing top-level intelligence to prevent terrorist attacks and save lives. But no, I was thinking at first I just want a job that's interesting. And along the way, you discover, oh, wait a minute, there are these interesting people doing this here and doing this here. And I think Jeff talked about that very clearly. Matt also with Baghdad and other things fell into that. If you have a path and a ladder you're trying to climb, you're almost necessarily not going to pursue the things that would turn you on more. So getting off the ladder is a hard thing to do, especially when you've been on it and succeeding at getting to the top faster than most of your colleagues. But I stepped off the ladder. After that job, I was a manager at CIA, and then I walked away, even though I was being pulled up the management chain, because I wanted to do some things that just weren't part of the career path that was being laid out for me. People thought I was crazy, but people thought I was crazy when I left the PhD thing and didn't become an academic, because Duke is a PhD factory for teaching at Harvard, Stanford, even UNC. So stepping away can work, but you've got to be honest with yourself. And you've got to say, what is it that I want to do, and will transitioning from that to something else get me there? Or am I just looking for a new experience to recharge my batteries? If you do well in almost any experience, it will help you with other experiences. It's not about where it is on the ladder. It's about, do you do well, and will people speak well of the work you do? That's true now, definitely true as you go through a career.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that, I'm often, and maybe someone was thinking about the question asked, like, well, I've got this job and I want that job, how do I get there? And I would always say to people when I was at Baghdad or at DOJ doing national security stuff, or in the private sector, when I went in-house for a number of years with some big companies, I'd always say, the job you're doing today, do that really well. that's your golden ticket to get to the next thing, whatever that is, whether it's another rung up the ladder, as David just talked about, or you go sideways into some new field that you haven't been exposed to. And that's also how you build your network, right? You do great work for the people that you're surrounded by, your boss, your team, your peers, people that might be underneath you. I mean, those are all things that you need to be thinking about is, if I do this job really well today, that's gonna open doors just automatically for me down the road, because I developed this reputation as being reliable, consistent, exercising excellent judgment, being a model of integrity with, no questions about, my ethical decision making. And those are all things that the national security agencies treasure, they chase. I mean, they are in a wild competition with the private sector for talent. It's an unbelievably cutthroat competition right now. Because, you all are smart. If you guys have certain skill sets, whether it's your lawyers or your coders or whatever, there are far more lucrative jobs in the private sector, incredibly more lucrative jobs. Now the flip side is, none of those jobs will offer you the amazing mission and satisfaction you get out of joining, some aspect of the national security apparatus. There are no better missions in the private sector than doing something great for Uncle Sam and your fellow citizens. It's the best. And I've now been out of DOJ for 11 years, and I had great jobs. I had overseas assignments in the private sector. I was handsomely compensated, and I don't regret any of those experiences. But when I think about the feeling and the spring in my step I got out of every job I ever had, there's no question it was those national security assignments, because I was working on something much bigger than myself.
Yeah, kind of 2 points on top of what Matt just said. One indicator of how people enjoy their jobs is whether or not they're going to stay or not. So David and I might be unique in the sense of we left the agency before our professional careers were over, but the retention rate at CIA is actually incredibly low. Same for a lot of the other agencies, where if you go to the private sector, I've been at Accenture for 1.5 years, and I've probably been there more than 20% of the people. There's a lot of turnover at really big companies. So as this massive competition is going on between the corporate world and the national security and the government world, if you see these companies, these agencies are holding on to their people because of the mission, and because there's so many different opportunities inside these buildings once you get in.
Other questions? How many people are interested in national security jobs?
Good.
What attracts you?
Yeah, having a higher purpose, and like I said, like the mission, the spring in your step, like contributing to something bigger than myself.
Yeah. The other thing I would say too is, you think about career opportunities. If you apply to all the agencies and you roll snake eyes, also think about the private sector. Maybe you get a job as a contractor or doing something related to national security, but you're in the private sector, and then you apply 2 years later for jobs. That's okay. I mean, that's the path. I didn't start out right out of school going into a national security role. I practiced law for 5 years, 6 years. And that's a good way to start too. Because in my experience, particularly at DOJ, they treasured people that had real world experience, whatever that was. And I know the agency does. I know the entire IC treasures people that really understand how things work in the real world. So there are two ways to do it. You can do it right out of the gate once you graduate, or get a couple of years of great experience in whatever it is. As we said, linguistics, STEM, being an excellent lawyer. I mean, there are so many ways to get into it. There's so many paths you can travel. So, if you don't get that golden ticket before you graduate with the CIA or NSA, don't fret. Take another swing at it 2 years later after you've gotten some real world experience doing something else, but kind of in that general orbit of national security.
Does anybody want to litigate? Stand before the judge?
Ooh, I can talk to the limit of that. Right. Yeah.
There are a lot of chops you get standing before the judge, and one of the things the agency looks for, one of the things the State Department looks for, there are these qualities, okay? And the two big qualities we look for in the recruitment process is competence and confidence, not arrogance, confidence. And without, you can be confident, but without the confidence, we'll put you in the maybe pile. If your confidence rushes over to arrogance, we'll put you in the no pile. Okay, because you gotta work as a team. So confidence comes from lots of different experience, right? Several of my favorite case officer attorneys, they didn't practice national security law. They were litigators. They were good. They were good at arguments. Really good.
And one of the best non-official cover officers I ever worked with, these are the people who aren't, they don't have a official job with the US government that allows diplomatic immunity. So if such a thing existed, they would be people who looked like people in business and all of that. One of the best ones I ever worked with, he was somebody who had a law degree and he was an accountant. Basically did forensic accounting type stuff. Well, you don't have to stretch too hard to think how that could be useful going overseas and talking to people in various government and private sector jobs to get information that's valuable to the US government. So yes, think widely on all of these issues.
I guess one of the important things
Remind
was,
us your name. 'Cause
sorry,
you
I'm
snuck
Tino,
by.
yeah, I'm Tino, was the first name.
Tino?
T-I-N-O.
T-I-N-O.
Yeah.
Tino, it's nice to meet you.
So,
I'm a liberator, guys, which is why I'm standing. In certain environments, I have to get right close to you.
one of the things I think for all of us is like when we should start applying to certain jobs, time frame wise, and like what that looks like. So I know that you spoke about working somewhere while your clearance was happening, and then like when should we apply for some of these government jobs versus private sector jobs we're going to apply later in life or later in our law school careers, I guess. Can you guys speak on that, like the process?
Apply early and often, because the process will almost always take longer than you think. And not every agency and department, but most will allow you to defer for a period of time. So if it turns out that you do get in early and you're still finishing school or you're fulfilling a commitment elsewhere, you can often say, well, can I start in 6 months? Sometimes can I start in a year? And they will just put you in to that next crop.
So, having gone through law school, just thinking about your sequence and your timing, I would be thinking about it as soon as you finish your second year, right? Because as soon as you finish your second year, you're a year away from graduating. And if you want to take the bar exam, maybe you're 15 months away from being free to do something. Because you should, if you invested 3 years going through law school, even if you never want to practice law, take a bar exam. Take it in whatever the easiest state is right now. I don't know which it is. Pennsylvania always had the reputation as being the easy one to take, but get a bar, even if you go inactive, because it validates you as a lawyer. So what I would do, if I were in your shoes, is I would start applying for things that summer of my second year, in between my second and third year, because it'll take them 6 months to figure out if they want you, and then it'll take another 9 months to get your clearance done. And so that's about what? That's 15 months. That's about the time you'd finish your bar exam in October after your third year graduation. So that's when I would start applying.
Nothing really to add with what they, half the people that apply to these agencies don't get the interview process, or half the people who actually get offers never end up joining for one reason or another. So get in, once you're offered that job, you got through the clearance, they will hold it for you because it's really hard to find the people that will go through the process.
You can fill out your SF-86 anytime, though. It takes a long time.
Yeah,
to
so
get your first one.
Yeah, start that.
And keep it updated.
Yeah, some of us with military experience, I guess, how does that play a role in the process of getting these type of jobs?
Gentleman's preference.
And well, I know there's like preferred and then there's actual veterans preference, but that's not what I mean. I mean like there's policy type jobs and then there's field work type jobs in these type of environments. What does the application process look? Are they different for each of those things? And can you go from doing field work to doing, I guess, administrative type work and vice versa, switch back and forth?
You
Or
can
kinda
definitely,
silo?
you can definitely mix between those jobs once you're in.
Right.
Getting in, most of the jobs I worked in at CIA and state and was familiar with in others, there is not a military preference that is a direct line in because of it. There are some exceptions, like paramilitary officers, but that's not what we're talking about. However, that experience will not hurt you for any job you apply for. Definitely emphasize that.
Do you have a clearance?
I do, but I don't know, like, from the most part, experience talking to people, it doesn't really transfer. It just kind of is like an indicator that I'll be able to pass when I apply for the clearance there.
Doesn't hurt.
It doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
And I'll also make a suggestion, and again, it may not be NSI policy or George Mason, what George Mason law wants to hear. But also, think about how, if you're bound and determined to get into a particular organization or agency, think about what the least popular route is. Why do I say that? Not because you're gonna spend your career doing that least popular thing. So like someone, I think Dave made a comment about being a consular officer in the Foreign Service and stamping visas and passports. If there are a lot less people applying for that route than the others, I'd apply for that. I'd go do that job that maybe you're not jacked up about for 2 years, because once you're in, your ability to transfer to other things that are more interesting goes up exponentially. The hardest thing, I think, is getting in. Like, if I wanted to join the National Security Division at DOJ, but everyone's applying for that, but no one's applying for the tax division, I'd go apply at tax and do a great job there and build that internal network at DOJ, and then get them to say great things to you about the front office at the National Security Division. And you know, your ability to get in is much easier once you're in the institution. So also think kind of strategically about, how do I want to get into these places?
So adding on that, one of the most senior, well-respected case officers that I ever know, who was very, very high up in the Director of Operations, started his career as a personnel security. He was a cop at the guard at the front gate, and he's not the only one. So yes, absolutely, pursue those non-traditional jobs as well.
If you want to get the highest rating from State Department, the preferential treatment goes if you would be interested in working in Peace Corps. You get almost guaranteed admission after honorable service in Peace Corps.
Except there will be a delay if you want to do that. I think there's like a waiting period before you go to the agency.
Yeah, you can't go to the agency, but just don't even think about it. But for State Department, since you have your eyes on state, a number of really good Foreign Service officers can get here. Lots of ways to serve.
I think we're at our hour, so I don't want to hold anyone, but we're happy to stick around for a few minutes if people want to come up to the front and chat with us.
Thank you all for coming.